The bright studio lights of CNN's primetime special. American Crockett illuminated Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's determined face as she sat across from conservative commentator Charlie Kirk. The tension in the room was electric, thick enough to cut with a knife. Just moments earlier, Kirk had confidently strutted onto the stage, his signature smirk plastered across his face as he waved to his supporters in the audience. Crockett is just another radical leftist with no facts, just emotions. Kirk had declared boldly to the moderator before they went live. "I've debated dozens like her. This will be easy," the audience murmured, some clapping, others shaking their heads. But Crockett, the Harvard-educated lawyer and rising Democratic star from Texas, didn't flinch. Instead, she calmly arranged a folder of documents on the table before her, a slight smile playing at the corner of her lips as the cameras began rolling. No one in that studio, not the producers, not the audience, and certainly not Charlie Kirk, had any idea that the next 90 minutes would completely upend Kirk's career and change the political landscape overnight. This wasn't just going to be another political debate. It was about to become a public execution. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation that has everyone talking, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more breaking political analysis that you won't find anywhere else. The stage was set for what seemed like just another heated political debate. On one side sat Charlie Kirk, the 30-year-old founder of Turning Point USA, conservative media darling and frequent Fox News guest. His organization had raised millions, boasted chapters on college campuses nationwide, and claimed to be fighting against what Kirk often called radical left indoctrination. Kirk had built his brand on being the young, aggressive face of modern conservatism, someone who prided himself on destroying liberals with facts and logic. With his clean-cut appearance and rapid-fire speaking style, he had become a hero to many right-wing Americans who saw him as a straight-talking truth-teller, unafraid to challenge the establishment. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, the first-term Democratic representative from Texas, who had quickly made a name for herself with her incisive questioning in congressional hearings and unwavering advocacy for voting rights. Former criminal defense attorney with a reputation for methodical preparation and unflappable composure. Crockett wasn't known for fiery rhetoric, but rather for her surgical precision in dismantling opponents' arguments. Tonight's debate centers on government spending, education policy, and claims of election fraud. Topics both our guests have strong positions on, announced moderator Jessica Chen. We expect a spirited but respectful exchange. The stakes were high. This wasn't just another cable news shouting match. It was being billed as a defining generational clash between two rising stars representing America's divided political future. Millions were watching live across the country, with clips certain to go viral regardless of the outcome. Kirk leaned forward, microphone in hand, exuding confidence. "I appreciate the opportunity to finally have this conversation," he began, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who had given thousands of speeches. "For too long, representatives like Miss Crockett have pushed policies that are bankrupting our country and indoctrinating our children. Tonight, I'll be presenting the facts the mainstream media won't tell you." The camera panned to Crockett, who listened attentively, her expression neutral but focused. When Kirk finished his opening statement, she thanked the moderator politely. "I'm not here for performance or sound bites," she said calmly. "I'm here for the truth, and sometimes the truth requires receipts." She patted the folder in front of her gently, an action that seemed insignificant in the moment, but would soon take on enormous meaning. What viewers didn't know was that for 3 months, Crockett and her team had been meticulously gathering information, internal documents, contradictory statements, financial records, and more, all carefully organized in that unassuming folder. She hadn't come for a debate. She had come prepared for a reckoning. The first 30 minutes of the debate proceeded predictably. Kirk dominated the early exchanges with his trademark rapid-fire style, interrupting frequently, citing questionable statistics with absolute certainty, and playing to the audience with well-rehearsed one-liners about socialist spending and the radical left agenda. The fact is, Kirk declared, gesturing emphatically, Democrat spending has created the highest inflation in American history. That's not an opinion. That's economic reality. Crockett remained composed, occasionally correcting his most egregious factual errors, but seemingly allowing him to control the flow of the conversation. To casual observers, it might have appeared that Kirk was winning the exchange through sheer aggression and volume. Congressman, you voted for the American Rescue Plan, which economists across the spectrum agree was a major driver of inflation, Kirk pressed, his voice rising with confidence. How do you justify that vote when American families are suffering at the grocery store? Crockett took a measured breath before responding. I'd be happy to address that, Mr. Kirk, but first, I'd like to correct something you said earlier. Her voice remained steady, almost surprisingly gentle compared to Kirk's increasingly animated delivery. You stated that current inflation is the highest in American history. That's demonstrably false. Inflation reached nearly 20% in 1917 and almost 18% in 1980. The current rate isn't even in the top 5 historical instances, Kirk scoffed. Technical distinctions don't matter to families who can't afford groceries. Facts always matter, Crockett replied, making direct eye contact, not with Kirk, but with the camera. And that brings me to something important the viewer should understand. The energy in the room subtly shifted. For the first time, Crockett opened the folder that had been sitting in front of her throughout the debate. Mr. Kirk, you've built your career on claiming to be a champion of facts over feelings, she continued, her tone still measured, but taking on a new edge of intensity. You've said repeatedly that you base your arguments on cold, hard data, not emotion. Is that a fair characterization of your approach? Kirk nodded confidently. Absolutely. Unlike many on the left, I don't need to rely on emotional appeals. The facts support conservative positions. Crockett nodded thoughtfully. That's interesting because I've been reviewing your statements over the past 3 years, and I've noticed something concerning. She slid a document across the table. This is a transcript from your speech at the Conservative Political Action Conference last year. You claimed, and I quote, Democrats have allowed 10 million illegal immigrants to cross the border under Biden. That same week on your podcast, you said the number was 5 million. 3 weeks later, at a Turning Point rally, you claimed it was 15 million. The audience stirred. IK's expression flickered briefly before he regained his composure. Different contexts require different facts, Crockett interjected, her voice still calm, but now carrying unmistakable authority. The actual number from Customs and Border Protection for that period was 2 million encounters, many of which were repeat crossings by the same individuals. So, which is it, Mr. Kirk? Are you deliberately misleading your audiences, or are you simply careless with facts? Kirk's face flushed slightly. I'm citing various sources with different methodologies. The exact number isn't as important as the border crisis itself. So facts don't actually matter when they're inconvenient to your narrative, Crockett pressed, pulling another document from her folder. Let's try another example. What followed was a systematic dismantling of Kirk's credibility. With methodical precision, Crockett presented instance after instance of Kirk making contradictory claims, citing non-existent studies and misrepresenting statistics. With each example, she provided dates, venues, and exact quotes, occasionally playing brief audio clips from Kirk's own podcast to drive home her points. The moderator, Jessica Chen, attempted to redirect the conversation several times, but Crockett respectfully insisted on finishing her point. The American people deserve to know if the self-proclaimed champion of facts actually has a problematic relationship with the truth, Crockett explained, her voice carrying a hint of genuine concern rather than triumph. Kirk's responses grew increasingly defensive. These are cherry-picked examples taken out of context, he insisted, his voice rising. Everyone makes occasional misstatements in hundreds of hours of public speaking. I agree that everyone makes mistakes, Crockett nodded. Which is why I've focused only on claims you've repeated multiple times across different platforms, even after being corrected publicly. These aren't slips of the tongue, Mr. Kirk. They appear to be deliberate patterns of misinformation. The tension in the studio was palpable. Kirk's supporters in the audience had grown noticeably quieter, while murmurs increased among the rest of the crowd. Social media was already exploding with reactions. The borde hiervan av Kirk Hans Crockett receipts trending within minutes. But Jasmine Crockett was just getting started. The folder contained much more than fact checks of public statements. What she revealed next would turn an embarrassing debate moment into a career-ending catastrophe for Charlie Kirk. Crockett said, her voice taking on a new gravity. I'd like to shift our discussion to Turning Point USA, the organization you founded and continue to lead. Kirk seemed relieved at the change of topic, quickly regaining some of his earlier confidence. I'm proud of what we've built. The largest conservative youth organization in the country, with chapters on over 3,000 campuses fighting for free speech and traditional American values. Crockett nodded thoughtfully. Those are impressive numbers. In fact, your organization has frequently cited them in fundraising materials. She removed a stack of papers from her folder. Like this letter sent to donors last quarter claiming 3,250 active campus chapters. That's right, Kirk replied, some color returning to his face as he found more comfortable ground. I found that number interesting, Crockett continued. So my office conducted a survey. We contacted administrators at 500 randomly selected four-year colleges and universities across the country, asking if they had an active registered Turning Point USA chapter on campus. The audience grew completely silent. Even the moderator leaned forward slightly. Would you care to guess what we found, Mr. Kirk? Kirk's expression tightened. I'm sure there are administrative delays in some registrations. Of the 500 schools we contacted, only 73 confirmed having an active registered Turning Point chapter, Crockett stated flatly. That's about 15%. If that percentage holds across all American colleges and universities, it would suggest you have closer to 450 chapters nationwide, not 3,250. Murmurs rippled through the audience as Kirk's face flushed again. Furthermore, Crockett continued, now removing a USD drive from her folder, we've obtained internal Turning Point USA documents that paint a concerning picture of how your organization operates. She turned to the moderator. Mrs. Shen, I've provided your production team with these files before the show, and they've confirmed they're prepared to display some key excerpts. The large screen behind them flickered to life, displaying what appeared to be an internal Turning Point USA email from just 4 months earlier. This is an email from your Director of Field Operations to regional coordinators, Crockett explained for the audience. It instructs them to, quote, maintain the appearance of active chapters even where student interest has waned, and count any campus where we've ever had a presence as an active chapter for donor purposes. The email continued with instructions to recycle event photos when necessary and prioritize quantity of claimed chapters over quality of engagement. The color drained from Kirk's face. I'm not familiar with this specific communication. If authentic, it doesn't reflect our organizational policy. There are dozens more like it, Crockett replied, her voice still measured but firm. But perhaps more concerning are the financial documents. The screen changed to display a spreadsheet. This is a breakdown of Turning Point USA's expenditures from the last fiscal year obtained from internal records. According to your public tax filings, approximately 65% of your budget goes to educational programming and campus activities. But these internal documents tell a different story. The spreadsheet clearly showed that only 26% of expenditures went to campus programs, while over 40% was categorized as executive compensation and related expenses. Mr. Kirk, is it true that despite positioning Turning Point USA as a grassroots student organization, you personally received total compensation of $783,000 last year from Turning Point and related entities? Elective gasp went through the studio audience. Kirk's face had turned ash. Furthermore, Crockett continued relentlessly. These documents show that while your campus chapters often struggle for basic funding, Turning Point spent $2.7 million on private jet travel last year. Much of it for you and a small circle of executives. Kirk finally found his voice. This is taken completely out of context. Running a national organization requires how many claims 3,250 campus chapters, but appears to have fewer than 500. Crockett interjected. One that tells donors their money supports students, but spends more on executive travel than on actual campus activities. The moderator tried to intervene. Congresswoman, while these allegations are serious, they're not allegations, Ms. Chen Crockett corrected gently. They're documented facts from Turning Point's own internal records, which my office has authenticated with multiple former employees. She turned back to Kirk. But perhaps most troubling are the strategy documents we've obtained. The screen changed again, now showing what appeared to be a PowerPoint presentation titled Campus Engagement Strategy 22. Forentor Hyphen 24. This internal strategy document explicitly instructs campus coordinators to, quote, identify emotionally vulnerable students for recruitment and leverage personal crises as conversion opportunities. Reading directly from the document displayed on screen, Crockett continued. Students experiencing academic struggles, social isolation, family problems, or identity issues are most receptive to our messaging. Approached them during these vulnerable periods with solutions framed around conservative principles. The audience erupted in scattered exclamations of disgust. Kirk looked physically ill. Mr. Kirk, Crockett said, her voice now carrying unmistakable moral authority. You've built your career claiming to fight against manipulation and indoctrination on college campuses. Yet your own organization explicitly trains recruiters to target emotionally vulnerable young people during personal crisis. How do you reconcile that? For several seconds, Kirk seemed unable to speak. The silence in the studio was deafening. When he finally responded, his voice had lost all its earlier confidence. These documents, this is a political hit job. These are clearly manipulated. Everything I've presented tonight has been authenticated by multiple sources, Crockett interrupted, her voice firm, but not unkind. Former employees have signed affidavit confirming their authenticity. Financial records have been verified by independent forensic accountants. And most importantly, none of this information came from political opponents. She leaned forward slightly, her expression almost sympathetic. It came from people inside your organization who believe your donors, your student members, and the American public deserve to know the truth about how Turning Point USA actually operates. The moderator, clearly recognizing the gravity of the moment, attempted to give Kirk an opportunity to recover. Mr. Kirk, would you like to respond to these specific documents? Kirk opened his mouth, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time in his public career, the normally loquacious commentator seemed completely at a loss for words. Crockett continued, her tone now softer, but no less devastating. Mr. Kirk has built a persona as someone concerned with truth and transparency. Tonight, I'm simply providing the transparency that his donors and supporters deserve. She turned to address the camera directly. This isn't about left versus right. It's about honesty and integrity in our public discourse. When organizations claim to represent students but exploit them, when they raise money for education but spend it on luxury, when they preach truth but practice deception, that undermines the very foundations of our democratic debate. The studio had fallen completely silent. Even Kirk's most ardent supporters in the audience appeared stunned. In that moment, it was clear to everyone watching that Charlie Kirk's carefully constructed public image had just been systematically, methodically, and irrevocably dismantled on national television. The impact of Jasmine Crockett's methodical takedown of Charlie Kirk was immediate and seismic. As the CNN special cut to a commercial break, the production staff reported that their online streaming numbers had doubled in just 15 minutes as word spread across social media platforms. By the time the broadcast resumed, Kirk Exposed was the #1 trending topic nationwide, with Crockett receipts and Turning Point scandal close behind. Video clips of the most damaging moments were already being shared millions of times across every major platform. Kirk, visibly shaken, attempted to regain his footing in the final segment. "What we've seen tonight is a coordinated political attack," he insisted, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. Congresswoman Crockett and her staff have clearly spent months compiling selective information designed to damage Turning Point USA and silence conservative voices on campus. But Crockett was prepared even for this deflection. "Mr. Kirk, I understand your instinct to frame this as political," she responded calmly, "but I want to be very clear about something. The majority of the documentation I presented tonight came from lifelong conservatives within your own organization who could no longer reconcile your public claims with the reality they witnessed." She removed one final document from her folder. This is a signed letter from 23 former Turning Point USA employees, 18 of whom identify as conservative Republicans, expressing their concerns about the organization's practices. They describe a culture of deception, financial mismanagement, and ethical compromise that ultimately drove them to speak out. The moderator, recognizing the historic nature of what was unfolding, asked Crockett, "Congresswoman, why bring these issues to a debate rather than to proper authority?" "Who says I haven't?" Crockett replied with a slight smile. "My office has already provided all relevant financial documentation to the appropriate oversight bodies. But the American people deserve to know the truth as well, especially the young people and donors who have placed their trust in Mr. Kirk and Turning Point USA." As the debate concluded, the contrasting images were striking. Crockett, composed and resolute, gathering her materials with the quiet confidence of someone who had completed a difficult but necessary task. Kirk, ashen-faced and uncharacteristically silent, being quickly escorted off stage by his entourage, ignoring questions from reporters. The aftermath unfolded with breathtaking speed. Within hours, major donors to Turning Point USA began publicly distancing themselves from the organization. Sentinel Financial Group, which had contributed over $5 million in the previous year, issued a statement announcing an immediate freeze on all future donations pending an independent audit. 3 other major contributors followed suit before midnight. By morning, the story had reached mainstream coverage beyond political media. Youth organization founder exposed blur the headlines across network morning shows. Financial analysts began questioning the legal implications of the apparent discrepancies between Turning Point's public tax filings and the internal documents Crockett had revealed. On campus, the reaction was even more dramatic. Students at dozens of colleges with active Turning Point chapters demanded answers, with several chapter presidents announcing their resignations on social media. At the University of Florida, the entire leadership team of what had been one of Turning Point's flagship chapters announced they were dissolving their affiliation with the national organization. "We joined Turning Point USA because we believed in conservative principles and free expression," their statement read. "After seeing the internal documents revealed last night, we cannot in good conscience continue our association with an organization that appears to operate counter to those very principles." Conservative media figures found themselves in a difficult position. Some initially attempted to defend Kirk, dismissing Crockett's evidence as selective or lacking context. But as more details emerged, and additional former Turning Point employees came forward to corroborate the document's authenticity, many shifted to a more cautious stance. By the second day, even Fox News, which had frequently featured Kirk as a commentator, began reporting on the serious allegations facing Turning Point USA. Several conservative columnists wrote pieces questioning the damage Kirk's apparent deception could do to the broader conservative movement. "If we claim to stand for truth and transparency, "We cannot circle the wagons when one of our own is credibly accused of violating those principles," wrote one prominent conservative commentator. "The movement must be bigger than any individual personality." Kirk himself remained uncharacteristically silent for nearly 48 hours before finally posting a video statement to social media. Gone was the confident, rapid-fire delivery that had defined his public persona. Instead, he appeared subdued, reading carefully from prepared remarks. In recent days, selected internal documents from Turning Point USA have been taken out of context to paint a misleading picture of our organization. He stated, "While I stand by the important work we've done, I recognize that greater transparency is needed. Therefore, I am temporarily stepping back from my role as president, while we conduct a comprehensive review of our operations and financial practices." The statement was immediately recognized as inadequate by observers across the political spectrum. "Too little too late," commented one conservative radio host who had previously been supportive of Kirk. The questions raised by these documents require real answers, not vague statements about context. The financial fallout accelerated. By the end of the week, Turning Point USA had lost commitments representing over 60% of its projected annual budget. 3 board members resigned, citing fiduciary concerns and the need for new leadership to restore trust. Campus chapters continued to disaffiliate at an alarming rate. Of the 73 verified active chapters Crockett's office had identified in their survey, more than half had either dissolved or declared independence from the national organization. Within 10 days of the debate, for Jasmine Crockett, the aftermath brought a new level of national prominence. While she had already been respected within Democratic circles, her methodical dismantling of Kirk elevated her to a new echelon of political effectiveness. She continued to emphasize that her actions weren't primarily partisan. "This wasn't about attacking conservatism," she explained in a subsequent interview. "It was about holding accountable an organization that appears to have deceived young people and donors. Integrity shouldn't be a partisan issue." Her approach resonated beyond her Democratic base. A poll conducted 2 weeks after the debate found that 47% of self-identified conservatives viewed her actions as appropriate and necessary, with another 22% describing them as concerning but justified by the evidence presented. Political analysts began speculating about Crockett's future prospects. "What we witnessed wasn't just a debate victory," noted one prominent commentator. "It was a demonstration of the kind of meticulous preparation and strategic discipline that defines transformative political figures." For Charlie Kirk, the path forward appeared increasingly narrow. Major speaking engagements were canceled. Media appearances dried up. Former allies distanced themselves. The carefully constructed platform he had built over a decade seemed to be crumbling beneath him. 3 weeks after the debate, the final blow came. An announcement that the IRS had opened a formal investigation into Turning Point USA's finances, specifically examining the discrepancies between public filings and internal documents. That same day, Kirk announced his resignation as president of Turning Point USA, citing the need to address these baseless allegations without distracting from the organization's important work. But for many observers, the resignation represented not just the end of Kirk's leadership role, but the effective conclusion of his influence in conservative politics. The brand he had built on claims of factual authority and organizational success had been irrevocably damaged by Crockett's methodical presentation of contradictory evidence. There are few examples in modern political history of such a complete and rapid fall from influence, noted one political historian. What makes this case unique is that it wasn't caused by a personal scandal or criminal charges, but simply by the public exposure of the gap between rhetoric and reality. The broader implications extended beyond just one organization or personality. Across the political landscape, donors began asking tougher questions about how their contributions were being used. Youth political organizations faced increased scrutiny about their actual campus presence versus their public claims. The Crockett effect, as some began calling it, introduced a new standard of accountability for political organizations and commentators. The old adage that sunlight is the best disinfectant had been dramatically demonstrated on national television. For ordinary Americans watching the fallout, the lessons seemed clear. In an era of information overload and partisan media bubbles, facts still ultimately matter. Carefully researched evidence, methodically presented, could still cut through the noise of political theater. 6 months after the debate, Turning Point USA announced a complete organizational restructuring under new leadership with dramatically scaled-back claims about its campus presence and a new emphasis on financial transparency. While the organization continued to operate, its influence had been permanently diminished. Charlie Kirk, once a ubiquitous presence in conservative media, largely disappeared from public view. Occasional reports suggested he was working on a book about cancel culture and the left's war on conservative voices, but major publishers showed little interest. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, continued her rise in Democratic politics, known now not just for her progressive policies, but for her methodical approach to political accountability. "Bring the receipts" became an unofficial slogan among her growing base of supporters. Perhaps the most significant legacy of that fateful debate night was a subtle but important shift in political discourse. Claims that once might have gone unchallenged now faced greater scrutiny. Organizations that had operated in the shadows of partisan politics found themselves subject to new levels of examination. In the end, what happened between Jasmine Crockett and Charlie Kirk wasn't just about two political figures or one organization. It was about the enduring power of documented truth in an era when that concept itself had seemed increasingly fragile. The night Jasmine Crockett brought her folder of evidence to CNN became a case study in political communication classes nationwide. A reminder that beyond the sound bites and social media wars, methodical research and calm presentation could still change the course of public discourse. As we've seen in this incredible political showdown, preparation and truth can triumph over even the most established personalities. If you found this breakdown valuable, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our analysis of the biggest political moments as they happen. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on Crockett's strategy or predictions about what this means for political accountability going forward. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in our next deep dive into the stories shaping America's political landscape.